Good morning. Welcome to Line by Line Bible Studies. I was waiting. I sat there. I was waiting for the song to end because it doesn't end just like that. But I think I remember making that clip and thinking I'll just pull it right there, and that's funny. Okay. So this is a long psalm. This is a long psalm. Let's read it. All right. Maskil of Asaph. I believe Maskil was instruction. We'll look it up later. Once again, not as important as the actual, all we will do by looking at that title is see, does it line up? Does this seem like instructive? It's all instructive. So I don't know. On some level, I get tired of worrying about the stuff on the edges. It's just, okay. That's why I talked about it in Study 88, and I don't like to talk about it anymore. Give ear, O my people, to my law. Incline your ears to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth in a parable. I will utter dark sayings of old, which we have heard and known, and our fathers have told us. We will not hide them from their children. Hold on a second. We will not hide them from their children, showing to the generation to come the praises of the Lord, and his strength, and his wonderful works that he hath done. For he established a testimony in Jacob, and appointed a law in Israel, which he commanded our fathers that they should make them known to their children, that the generation to come might know them, even the children which should be born, who should arise and declare to their children, them to their children, that they might set their hope in God, and not forget the works of God, but keep his commandments, and might not be as their fathers, a stubborn and rebellious generation, a generation that set not their heart aright, and whose spirit was not steadfast with God. The children of Ephraim, being armed and carrying bows, turned back in the day of battle. They kept not the covenant of God, and refused to walk in his law, and forgot his works, and his wonders that he had showed them. Marvelous things did he in the sight of their fathers, in the land of Egypt, in the fields of Zoan. He divided the sea and caused them to pass through, and he made the waters to stand as an heap. In the daytime also he led them with a cloud, and all the night with a light of a fire. Or with a light of fire. He clave the rocks in the wilderness, and gave them drink as out of the great depths. He brought streams also out of the rock, and caused waters to run down like rivers. And they sinned yet more against him by provoking the Most High in the wilderness. And they tempted God in their heart by asking meat for their lust. Yea, they spake against God. They said, can God furnish a table in the wilderness? Behold, he smote the rock, that the waters gushed out, and the streams overflowed. Can he give bread also? Can he provide flesh for his people? Therefore the Lord heard this and was wroth, so a fire was kindled against Jacob, and anger also came up against Israel, because they believed not in God, and trusted not in his salvation, though he had commanded the clouds from above, and opened the doors of heaven, and he had rained down manna upon them to eat, and had given them of the corn of heaven. Man did eat angels' food. He set them meat to the full. He caused an east wind to blow in the heaven, and by his power he brought in the south wind. He rained flesh also upon them as dust, and feathered fowls like as the sands of the sea. And he let it fall in the midst of their camp round about their habitations, so they did eat, and were well filled, for he gave them their own desire. They were not estranged from their lust, but while their meat was yet in their mouth, the wrath of God came upon them, and slew the fattest of them, and smote down the chosen men of Israel. For all this they sinned still, and believed not for his wondrous works. Therefore their days he did consume in vanity, and their years in trouble. Did I just skip too many verses? Oh yeah, verse 33. Okay, again. Verse 33. We got a few more to go. When he slew them, then they sought him, and they returned and inquired early after God. And they remembered that God was their rock, and the high God their Redeemer. Nevertheless, they did flatter him with their mouth, and they lied unto him with their tongues, for their heart was not right with him, neither were they steadfast in his covenant. But he, being full of compassion, forgave their iniquity, and destroyed them not. Yet many a time turned he his anger away, and did not stir up all his wrath. For he remembered that they were but flesh, a wind that passeth away, and cometh not again. How oft did they provoke him in the wilderness, and grieve him in the desert? Yea, they turned back and tempted God, and limited the Holy One of Israel. They remembered not his hand, nor the day when he delivered them from the enemy, how he had wrought his signs in Egypt, and his wonders in the field of Zoan, and had turned their rivers into blood, and their floods that they could not drink. And he sent diverse sorts of flies among them, which devoured them, and frogs, which destroyed them. He gave also their increase unto the caterpillar, and their labor unto the locust. He destroyed their vines with hail, and their sycamore trees with frost. He gave up their cattle also to the hail, and their flocks to hot thunderbolts. He cast down upon them the fierceness of his anger, wrath, and indignation and trouble by sending evil angels among them. He made a way to his anger. He spared not the soul from death, but gave their life over to the pestilence, and smote all the firstborn of Egypt, the chief of their strength, in the tabernacles of Ham. But made his own people to go forth like sheep, and guided them in the wilderness like a flock. Sorry, I got a little itch. Got a feather there or something. Yeah, not picking my nose. Not really. Because there's no boogers. That doesn't count. Verse 52, but made his own people to go forth like sheep, and guided them in the wilderness like a flock. And he led them on safely, so that they feared not. But the sea overwhelmed their enemies. And he brought them to the border of his sanctuary, even to this mountain, which his right hand had purchased. Sorry, should have muted that. He cast out the heathen also before them, and divided them an inheritance by line, and made the tribes of Israel to dwell in their tents. Yet they tempted and provoked the Most High God, and kept not his testimonies, but turned back and dealt unfaithfully like their fathers. They were turned aside like a deceitful bow, for they provoked him to anger with their high places, and moved him to jealousy with their graven images. When God heard this, he was wroth, and greatly abhorred Israel, so that he forsook the tabernacle of Shiloh, the tent which he had placed among men, and delivered his strength into captivity, and his glory into the enemy's hands. He gave his people over also unto the sword, and was wroth with his inheritance. The fire consumed their young men, and their maidens were not given to marriage. Their priests fell by the sword, and their widows made no lamentation. Then the Lord awakened as one out of sleep, like a mighty man that shouteth by reason of wine. And he smote his enemies in the hinder parts, and he put them to a perpetual reproach. Moreover, he refused the tabernacle of Joseph, and chose not the tribe of Ephraim, but chose the tribe of Judah, the Mount Zion which he loved. And he built his sanctuary like high palaces, like the earth which hath established, like the earth which he hath established forever. He chose David also his servant, and took him from the sheepfolds. From following the ewes great with young, he brought him to the feet. From following the ewes great with young, he brought him to feed Jacob his people, and Israel his inheritance. So he fed them according to the integrity of his heart, and guided them by the skillfulness of his hands. And that very well could be then Asaph of David's period, because he ends the Psalm of David. But he talks about captivity. You got to understand there were other captivities, not wholesale captivities. But also it sounds much, actually, this would have to be after David, though, like after Solomon. Because unless you would take the references to Ephraim and Judah as being prophetic. Because the rejection of Ephraim was much later. Ephraim didn't go into captivity for like centuries until after David. But there were other captivities in the time of the judges, where they had taken some of the people captive and so on and so forth. I know one where there was like, in the time of Deborah, they were particularly taking the women away. And so I haven't been in Judges in a while, but that at least. But also, I would just take it not as a straightforward history, but a episodic history. For example, in the beginning, when he starts talking about the children of Ephraim being armed and carrying bows turned back in the day of battle. That's much later than the immediate thing about, Egypt, which is the next thing he talks about. That wasn't why they were in captivity in Egypt. The Ephraim turning back from battle is not. That's not a reference to Egypt. So that's a later imposition. Not that it's just in the Psalm. He's mentioning this, not in a chronological order. It's just what it is it's episodic, and it also, there's like it refers to many episodes, and also certain parts. There's certain specific episodes, and there's a bit of chronology, but some of it's out of chronology, and it's not strictly chronological. Just to keep that in mind. So he opens with this thing of, give ear, my people, to my law, incline your ears to the word of my mouth. I will open my mouth in a parable. I will utter dark sayings of old, which we have heard and known. So these are not new things. All this is like history. But there's some dark things in it. Dark sayings. This thing about dark sayings in the Bible, it comes up every once in a while. King of fierce countenance, understanding dark sentences and dark sayings. And I've always been very interested in such things. I was like, yeah, how do you understand those things? But it is quite true that, that which is not illuminated, that which we do not see is dark. Also, meaning it's things that aren't spoken of all the time, perhaps. That's what I'm just saying, like, the idea behind it. I wanted to look it up, though, just in the good old browsing the internet way. Oh, I didn't switch to Psalm. So that is a long Psalm. But we will go through it, actually. Parts of it we'll go through rather quickly, like this part, because I think the meaning is pretty clear. Dark sayings. Kida, a riddle. What is a parable? A proverb. Mashal. Mashal is a proverb or a parable. Chida, this is the one that is dark saying. Noun feminine. A riddle, an enigmatic, perplexing saying or question. Or difficult. It's translated dark sayings in the New American Standard. Dark sayings, difficult questions. Insinuations. Interesting. Intrigue, riddle. I almost want to say scandal, like when it starts saying intrigue. Here it's the dark. When they say riddle, they don't mean like in the strict sense of like riddle me this, riddle me that, but things that are riddle-like, meaning not easily figured out. But I don't think that necessarily, that could be a bit of an ironic thing that he's saying. But the true riddle, I would say, the hardest part of the whole thing, is what they keep screwing up generation after generation. The fact that, tell it to your children and teach them, and somehow it just doesn't work. And somewhere along the line, or they know it and they're not able to fulfill it. That could be the other thing. Like that they could know these things. It says we have heard and known this. This is well known. And and that could be true. You think about how many people have heard of the Exodus story. They know a bit about it. But it's like, do they know all the details? Do they remember that the children, how many of them were killed in the wilderness? How many of them fell? How many of them with whom he was not pleased? How not a single adult from that generation, save Caleb and Joshua, made it to the promised land? Only 2. The whole nation made it there. The nation, the next generation made it. But the first generation was to wander the wilderness for 40 years until they all died off. Everyone 40 and upward. I believe it was, right? So that's when, those are the people held responsible for my initial impulse when he talked about Ephraim turning back from the battle was when the Lord wanted them to go in and take the promised land immediately after leaving Egypt, or not 40 years later, that same year or whatever, within a very short, I don't know what the time frame was there. That's something I didn't pay a lot of attention to, and I don't know if it tells us. But anyways, so they wanted to do that. Well, God wanted them to go in, but they were afraid because of the giants, and they turned back from the battle when God had said, go ahead. And so, because they didn't believe in him, they didn't trust him. And then throughout the time in the wilderness, they still didn't believe or trust. And I say trust because that's the thing, is like, believing God exists is not the same as trusting him. Especially when you know that God is a person. He's not a force of nature. He's not just like gravity. Like, I can trust gravity like this. I mean, it's going to be there. Or we assume, right? It's not absolutely certain, but we believe it's going to be there. I don't expect to wake up tomorrow morning and floating against the ceiling. So we trust, but they don't trust God. Like, okay, he said go to battle. Well, we saw a lot of amazing things. A lot of the plagues, it talks about the plagues of Egypt, but then they still had doubt. When you say, how would they doubt after all those things? Well, it's like, a bunch of frogs come out of the river is not the same as asking me to go fight. You know what I mean? When the Lord sends, frog, like the Lord does all this stuff, and it's like, okay, now you can do something. Remember, Moses himself was a bit reluctant. When God wanted to send him, he was like, I can't talk. And he was reluctant. So God appointed Aaron, his brother, to speak for him. You have a brother, he can talk. You sense a bit of annoyance. And again, do I see God actually being annoyed and stuff? No, but because God is far above us and knows all things and all that, so it's sort of like there's no surprises. But I do think there's a bit of an emote that he does so that we can understand. That's the way we communicate. We don't, like if someone communicates with us, they have to put something in it so we understand. It's hard when it's just dry words. Emotions are put into it. And God has feelings, no doubt. What I'm saying is, like, I can't see him being just caught up in them and swept along by, I've got this, now this feel, I certainly can't say it like that, because he's God. He knows all. He foresees all. There aren't surprises. Anything done, I do believe that God does do things for our benefit, and that's one of the reasons why it becomes, just like the for our benefit, the baptism of Jesus. That whole thing is done for our benefit so we can see something. It's like the Holy Spirit descending in bodily shape like a dove, the voice from the heavens, and they're the man, this is my beloved Son, in whom I'm well pleased. Demonstrating something that doesn't have to be done like that. The Holy Spirit could just be in him, but it's done for our sakes so that it could be said that it was seen. Even if it was only appeared to him. That's the point. So we could understand what he saw. I will utter dark sayings of old. The darkest part of the saying, as I was saying, is like, getting it. Not just, it's a question. We will not hide them from their children. From their children. So, our fathers have told us we won't hide them from their children. They probably mean grandchildren then. Because showing to the generation to come the praise of the Lord and his strength and his wonderful works. They didn't have a word for grandchildren. So your grandfather was your father. He was another, like they say, Jacob, our father. He's just another one of our former fathers. They didn't have a specific word for things like that, those relationships. And they didn't do things like saying your father's father, as far as I know. There's no father's 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 father or whatever. They just refer to their ancestors that way. And so grandchildren would be that. And certainly it gets later on. They said to their children and to their children's children. I think. No, they say it in such a way. Yeah, so it's like even to the children which should be born, which should arise and declare them to their children. That You cannot hide it from your children, but you cannot. How do you make them believe it? You can tell them all about. These are the wonders God did, and this is how the people reacted, and this is how they angered God, and this is how they, you can explain the whole thing just like the Psalm does. But it's only a warning. It won't. In some it might inspire faith, but it can't guarantee it. Like just telling someone the story can't. So how do you get? That's the darkest part, because you tell people these things, and they're like, "Oh yeah, okay, an interesting story." It goes to that hidden wisdom in 1 Corinthians I refer to all the time, which none of the princes of this world knew. For had they known it, they would not have crucified the Lord. The Lord would not have been crucified if they'd known they were crucifying the Lord. If they knew he was the Lord. They're like, oh, this really is the Son of God. This is truly the Son of God. They would not have done that to themselves, as far as voluntarily be the ones who are going to do that. Because understanding the true repercussions of that action for their own sake, they would not take it. And there are many like things. If people believed all this about God, they wouldn't do certain things. That's why for some people, and at times I've thought on these things, of course. But sometimes when people are disobedient or sinful, it makes you question their faith. And I don't think it's not so much question your faith. And I do think there is a question of faith in when we sin, of course. Because it is a question of that on some level, because if you really believed, and you shouldn't, and et cetera, et cetera. But it's not a question. But it's a question of, to me, more of a degree, of as opposed to whether there's faith or no faith, at least in a believer. Because you have faith towards God, you believe in Him, you also trust Him. You believe in His salvation. Like I said, they did not believe in His salvation. But you believe in it. But sometimes you forget. You go forgetful because God is not imposing Himself on us constantly. We have to be mindful. We have to be mindful of God. And so when we get forgetful, that's especially when we sin. And sometimes we are intentionally forgetful or unmindful. Or sometimes there are things we are, I don't know. I say like things that we're not sure, how deep does the conscience go on that? As far as like, is it really, what is permissible? It says, Paul warned, what do you say, is it blessed is the man or something, who condemns not himself in that which he allows or something like that? I'm going to look that up. I'm just going to use my Bible collection here. I'll find it real fast. Allow. I think there's not a lot. 115 in the whole Bible. I just want the writings of Paul, which were not asked. Oh, there it is. Romans 14:22. Hast thou faith, have it to thyself before God. Happy is he that condemneth not himself in that which he alloweth. And this is Romans 14. Of course, that's the passage, because that's the one where it talks about the meats. Because some people still think, okay, because the law said the Jews were not to eat pork. And not pork, it doesn't specify it. Does it specify swine? It specifies certain things about the anatomy of animals. So swine's flesh was among those animals which were forbidden. As were certain other things, many horses and all that. Only certain kinds of grazing animals that chew the cud and divide the hoof. And so there came all these designations because of that. But in the New Testament, we were given liberty. Even greater liberty, people were saying like, well, idols are nothing. And like, you can get really cheap meat from the shambles out back of the temple where they sell off the meat that was offered to idols. And we've been eating it for years, and we don't even worship the gods, or we believe in Jesus or whatever, And so the question comes up, is that lawful? Is that okay? I mean, it was offered to idols. Is that, and he says, yeah, it's all right. But you know what? When it comes to your brother, you got to make sure that you don't cause them to stumble. And he goes into a lot of detail in that. It's a good chapter to study as far as not just about meat and all that stuff, but just the basic concept of taking consideration for other people in the way you exercise your faith. Yeah, you feel comfortable doing things that maybe other people don't feel comfortable. You know, I got to be mindful. It's like sometimes I'm too loose with my tongue. You know, I could offend people with my foul language. Not that I use tons of it, you know, but occasionally I will, in real life, certainly use words that I probably shouldn't. You know what I mean? Like, and it's not like I'm making this hard decision to do it. It's like, you know, that's how it is. The tongue is a very difficult thing to master. But when we master it, we will master all. So that's, you know, gives me something to look forward to anyways. So we have heard and known, our fathers have told us, we will not hide them from our children, showing to the generation to come the praises of the Lord and his strength. You know, all the things that he's done, we got to tell them about what God did. You know, we got to tell them. But again, it's a bit of a dark saying, because you tell them and they go, okay, but how do you instill them with faith? Well, I do have some, I keep saying that. It's not in the Psalm. You know, it's not, I can't teach it. I mean, I can teach it, but what I'm saying is, like, I'm not going to extract it from this Psalm. It's just not there. They just say that we've got to do this. We know we've got to do it. That they cannot be, so why? That they might set their hope in God and not forget the works of God, but keep his commandments, and might not be as their fathers, a stubborn and rebellious generation. A generation that set not their heart aright, and whose spirit was not steadfast with God. The problem is they kept doing that. It took like centuries for Israel to become steadfast with God. To like settle like, we got one God. And if you don't believe, you're not even a Jew. You know, where they got it, so the social pressure is so strong in the time of Jesus that all the Jews, none worship idols. And you figure that after a while of God slaughtering all the people who worship idols, or causing them to be slaughtered and causing bad things to happen to Israel because of idolatry and other sins and iniquities. And it's not just idolatry. They were oppressing the poor as far as the government, and allowing it. I mean, because that's the thing. The government, one of the things the king should do is protect the poor of his people from the oppression of the mighty. You know, because they're his people. He, you know, like instead of David, he took them from feeding from taking care of the pregnant sheep to taking care of God's flock, his people. And he chose a shepherd for a king. You know, Saul also was a shepherd of sorts. I mean, he was going after, he was more of a herdsman. Wasn't it cattle? Wasn't Saul a cattleman? I forgot what he was looking for. If it was a horse that went off or a cow, a stray heifer. I thought it was a stray heifer. Yeah, it was a stray heifer. That's what it was. But also kind of looking after things. You know, it's a good, you know, taking care of animals is a good way to start taking responsibility, you know, for other things. Of course, you ought to be able to take care of yourself first. That's your first responsibility, is take care of you. Second, then things around you, yeah. The things that are closest to you. And for them, that was the animals that they cared for. And so we don't want our kids, the generation to come, you know, we want them to be better off than we are. But we see that there is, I don't know, there is a back and forth of history, let's say. Because I don't think that there is some people think there's a trajectory. Well, there is a trajectory, but there are also cycles. Because the world is headed in one particular direction. It's like, and it's inevitable. Inevitably, because I see it now, I realize it's going to happen at some point. Inevitably, there's going to be some sort of world kingdom rising. It's going to try. It's already trying to come together. It's got no chance as far as I can tell. I mean, I just think it's just not now. It's not right. If it's trying now, it's premature. Because people won't be having it. But we'll see. You know, the thing is, we see over the past 2 years how quickly things can change. How quickly our whole society can be turned upside down. You know, to where it's like, I mean, it just becomes absurd. Where people are, because here's the thing: it's like I don't want my life run by doctors. Period. I never have allowed that. When we had a doctor we didn't like in the birthing chamber, we got a different one. We're like, we're going to get a different doctor. Not we, my wife did that. But she wanted a different doctor. Because you know why? You don't have to work with any of these people. That's usually the way it goes. Optional. Especially after having failed so spectacularly. You'd think by now, we'd be into the trials and stuff. But no. They're still fighting for the power that they used corruptly and failed to really do anything to protect people from the threat that they created. They created a threat and then failed to protect us from it. Total failure. Complete failure of this is what bureaucracy does. It creates disasters. It's like it reminds me of like one of those, you ever watch those old stories where it's like, this is the worst moment of Carnegie, Andrew Carnegie. He had a plant like somewhere in a village and it got totally flooded because of some, project, and all these people died. Where people build something that they think, big and powerful and it's holding back some water or whatever, some big thing, and then it fails, and then everyone just gets inundated. Suddenly, in a moment, it breaks. That's like what happened. This giant agency has too much money. It should be defund the CDC, defund the NIH. They created, defund them, period. That's what we need to defund. Obviously, they have too much money if they can throw it around. It's like, whatever. Let's develop a super weapon so we can fight super weapons. Yeah, I get it. But it so much sounds like things that mad scientists would think of. But anyways, how do you get the next generation? It's not easy, especially first of all. You have to, if you in your family have not successfully gotten your children to a place of where they are adults who are obedient to God and that fear God and respect God and the history that God has given us. To be mindful of and to put our faith in Him and trust Him. If we don't instill that in them, if we can't in our own children, then what are we going to do for the world? What are we going to do for the world? What are we going to do for our neighbors? You're going to help the neighbors? And so I think it's interesting to the degree to which Christians fail at this utterly, so often. So often they fail. And they have kids that rebel against the faith. They have kids that will say things, publicly that, I always remember that one guy I talked about. I forgot his name now. He had an unfortunate name, like Swindler or something. It wasn't Swindler. It was like something like that. It was S something. Something that didn't sound like a, you could call my name unfortunate. I don't care, it's goofy sounding, I'd rather have goofy than something that sounds, I don't know if it was slick. Something like that. Something slick or something. His name sounds like, I wouldn't want to be Paul Slick. Or whatever. Or, Paul Shyster. It just doesn't sound, that's the kind of name I believe it was. But he had raised this girl up. He had taught her everything, man. He taught her things like homeostasis or homeologous. And I think actually those aren't the right words. She knew things like transubstantiation and the hypostatic union. She could rattle off the definitions, throw out verses. They sent her to college. And then she talks about how she enjoys having sex with her boyfriend and how she doesn't believe in God anymore. And that whole chastity thing, totally wasted. All that time spent. Oh, she'll come back. Whatever. That's the outcome of all that. Oh, was that normally like that? Whatever. Hold on a second. Is that the right? Actually, you know what? That's not the right mix level. Must have been quiet. It's loud as heck in my ears. Okay. So, I don't think that necessarily shoveling this stuff down their throat is the way. But you shouldn't hide it either. But you can hide it a bit. A bit, meaning this. There's some aspects of my faith which by nature are to myself. And which are precious to me. Yeah, how am I putting that? That's not so right. No, what I mean is my faith is precious. The things I believe in, they're precious. And I share them with my children. And we share them. My wife does a good job sharing those, like watching and reading and stuff, the stories and stuff when they're small. Sure. But, I don't like to say, you better believe it or cram in it, I don't make them memorize verses and, we usually read as far as for the stories and stuff, we don't read, I don't make them go right at the King James, that's for sure. Because I knew I couldn't follow it. And also, just like a lot of things, I don't hide it. But some of it is of necessity hidden. And that has nothing, that's beyond my control. It's hidden from all of our eyes. There are things that are dark to us we can't see. And, just like when I was young growing up, I was reading my Bible stories. I believed them. I was mostly, for the most part, to a certain point, let's say, a good kid, for the most part, to a certain point. Meaning, I looked at it, I believed those things. I had no reason to doubt, I guess I would say. Maybe there were reasons to doubt, but I didn't see any reason to doubt. Let me put it that way. I saw no reason to doubt. I understood why other people doubted, but I saw no reason for me to doubt it. And when I got to college, instead of being persuaded away from the gospel, that's when I found that's what I really wanted to follow in my life. That was the most important thing to me. And that's what when I told God I would serve him, I meant it. But also it was a time in my life where I was finally I was curious about the Bible. I wanted to really know what was in there and what was it all about and all that. And also I had taken the idea that I should serve God seriously. There was something I always thought was, when I was a kid, I thought preschool was priest school because it was in a church. When I was in 5th grade, I demanded to be sent to a religious school, which I immediately didn't want to go to as soon as I got there because 1, it sucks being new at a school. 2, it was normal school. The only difference was they said the Hail Mary at the beginning. I didn't even know what that was. I thought I was going to get religious training, not be shoved into a religious machine. I didn't realize that's what Catholic school is like. You know what I mean? And I didn't really know I was asking for Catholic school. I wanted to go to be, I was misunderstood, essentially. I was reading about Jesus sitting with the doctors, and thinking that's for me. At 11. That was the way I was thinking. But it doesn't mean, and so that's kind of different for a kid. But I do think with my children, it's like, just like with school, I look for the moments when they are ready to receive, when they are motivated to learn. Like when there comes a time with every small child when all of a sudden, like I delay a little reading instruction. You know why? Especially if it's too hard for them or they don't, because pretty soon they're like looking around all the words and they want to read. And that's the perfect time to teach them. They learn fast. I'm not a big I don't think that certain skills, there's windows of opportunity to teach people things. And the young mind is growing and learning very quickly. The idea that, some people are like, oh, we got to get them by 3 and stuff. I'm definitely not in that camp. The more you hammer a kid early, the more resentment later, as far as I'm concerned. As it's like they have their own life to live. And to the degree to which they feel like you are absolutely trying to manipulate their life and control their life, ultimately, that's going to spring back at you when they're teenagers and when they're older. That's where teenage rebellion comes from. It comes from basically you being nearly a stranger to them. Or, you gotta understand, kids are in school for 8 hours a day or more because of the traveling and stuff, right? And then they come home in the afternoon. You come home in the afternoon, and what is it, like 3-4 hours before bedtime? Or if they have sports, you maybe see them for 2 hours. Maybe you have dinner and that's it. It's hard, so you have this early time with your child, then you ship them off to school at 5 to start learning crap that they're not ready to learn. And they won't learn very well right away. And they're just going to be shuffled along doing make work, which is essentially what a lot of schools got a lot of make work where it's like, here, do this worksheet. This is BS. Like, you can focus on teaching the skills and not waste a lot of the kids' time. So in some ways, we put them in these prisons. And it's like, why do you think they'd come back and like be particularly care about what, after years of that? Why does what you say matter at all? And why doesn't everything that goes on there? That's the everything. And that's not a place of faith. I got a song for the schools. Well, it's dedicated to two people, actually. It's to the schools and to Disney. To the woke teachers and to all our woke friends at Disney. That's coming soon. Can't wait to get working on that video again. But, anyways, children, when they're ready to learn, you got to seize the moment. And when they're not, shoving it down their throat is very difficult. And like I said, if you got them going to school, and then at home it's like school too, but like you're cramming religion down their throat. Children need time to be kids and stuff. And, it's like part of life is living it. Not just like I said, it's like there's plenty of time as an adult to memorize verses. You got to get the big ideas into their head. Show them your faith. Be faithful. Model Christ-like behavior and stuff. You want to, because until they're adults, and especially when they're really young, the difference between like dad and mom and God is very small. Because God is very unknown and huge and far off, and adults seem that way too. And so, they don't understand the adult world, and they certainly don't understand the world of God. As far as like in the depths that you would want, in the depths that our faith go to. And parents often they want to get their kids saved. Your kids are safe because they're your kids and you're a believer. That's I don't try to fish confessions of belief out of them. I find that very distasteful. I feel like it would be damaging to my relationship, because it's like I wouldn't, and also potentially damaging to their relationship with God. And that's the worst nightmare of it, that the parents themselves who are trying to make good Christians out of their kids by doing things that doesn't really work very well. It may work to some degree, but it's like I've listened to people talk who are raised in these kind of strict, by the book, fundamentalist, raising the kids, like instructing them in religion and all that, like hard line. We instruct our kids in the faith, of course, but I do believe that it's a little more laid back than, because like I always say, you have to have the confidence. I believe my faith is precious. This is what I mean by hiding it a little. It's precious to me. I like to let it exude that I believe. I'm not like, do you believe, kid? Can you say Jesus? Can you say Jesus come into my heart, please? Could you please say that so I can feel comfortable? Would you say that, child? Please repeat after me. Lord Jesus, come in. It's like they're so badly like, gotta, but it's like, that's so weird. It's not the right way, as far as I'm concerned. It's like, I want them to be curious. So they hear things, they hear things, they know things, they're instructed in things. I certainly instruct them in right and wrong. What they, that's, that they should obey the Lord is do what's right and fear God, because God is judge and he knows. I don't give them a lot of God watches you and all that stuff. They know that. But I don't try to terrorize them into righteousness, because that's not how God does it. He doesn't terrorize us into righteousness. Now, if we sin, like they sinned, he might terrorize us for sin, but not for righteousness. I'm saying when people do bad things happen, and they can encounter terrors. Let's see, what is this? Great. May 2nd, whatever. Good. What about the list of paper? I got my paperwork got dirty. All right. So, not forget the works of God, but keep His commandments. You want your kids to end up in that place. What I'm saying is be slightly nuanced. One, have confidence in yourself. Believe in the faith. Believe in God. Believe in the passage that says that your children are sanctified because of your faith. That means they're already, in God's sight, these are the children of His adopted Son, and so they have every right to the faith that you have. It's theirs by inheritance. They could reject it, but you should foster it. But that doesn't mean like with a strong arm we just create. You don't need to strong arm kids. They're innocent little kids. They sin, but I mean, they have sin, but also they're innocent of so many of the corruptions of the world that come through knowledge. You know what I mean? They have sin, but their sin is somewhat innocent. Like when they lie at first, they're just testing it out. Though they like I said, we go astray from the womb. We miss the mark. And often we don't know right off. It takes, like, if you don't teach a kid that it's wrong to lie, he'll eventually learn it himself. He'll know he's doing wrong. I don't know that the first time a kid lies that they know it's wrong, but they do know what they're saying is wrong. You know what I mean? Like, they may not understand that it's wrong to lie, but then again, they maybe by just saying the wrong thing, it'll make everything right. Like, meaning, like the way God speaks, like the Lord could speak and the sea and the waves are immediately at rest. And so I could just talk and make this problem go away. It's like a miracle, a lie, in a bad way, right? It can be kind of miraculous. Did you do this and such and that and such? No. And problem solved. They've got to be taught. So, you teach them early on. That's another thing, that I instilled obedience through discipline. And my kids are all very well behaved. As adults, I'm not sure what, I know they all have sin. But they also know the Lord. And so that's an important goal. That's the whole point of this psalm, is to instill in the next generation that they would not be as their fathers, rebellious. So again, like I said, it's like in some level, this is a failure that happens over and over in every generation. It won't ever stop. There's always going to be, and it's not always the parent's fault, of course. Sometimes, because, of course. But I just think, like, when I have a child and God counts them sanctified and they go astray, I feel a wound. Like, I don't want my children to go astray. I've never had that. And I've only have 4 adult children, so, I mean, they're still young enough they can go astray, right? Though actually it says, train up a child in the right way and he will not depart from it. I think that's what's going to happen. I don't really feel like I got a lot of rebellion underneath me. Because, you know why? Because we made the faith attractive. We love our faith. We count it precious. They see that. They say, wow, it's really important to Dad and Mom. Like, I don't feel like I got to cram it down their throat because I radiate it. You know what I mean? Why would I then go the extra step and start cramming it down their throat? I'll tell you why. It's because of school. Because like you have so little time. Because I work from home and I homeschool, I'm around and able to instill discipline. And, that's the key. It's not, just to understand, that is the key factor of all the success I've had, is being present with my children. Even if I'm not constantly on them, I don't want to be constantly on them. I don't want to be constantly hounding them. They need to get their education. They need to find their faith. But I merely present those things in the best possible light. And the best possible light I can present my faith is, yes, by talking about the things that God has done, but especially the things He's done, the things He's done for me. And I think that's always been the most powerful testimony to anybody in my family when I start talking about my own faith and why and how important it is to me. That's what instills, I think, the greatest amount of of desire in the part of the child, especially if you have a good relationship with your children and they love you. You know, like I always used to say, I want them to be terrified of me and also to adore me. And if you accomplish those two things, you will have a good foundation as a father. Anyways, you know, mother is a little different. A good foundation for your kids to grow up and be faithful. You know, not necessarily perfect. Maybe not necessarily. You know, anyone who's seen my kids know that they have a lot of spirit to them. You know, they're not like just all subdued and stuff. So I mean, you know, they got high spirits a bit. You know, like me, and they like to do things and make noise and all that, which is good. I think people should be healthy and expressive, so you can express the gospel. And that we exercise, as much as we exercise other things, we also exercise ourselves in skills we use between people. I mean, like interacting with people and doing things is a good way to learn how to be with people, I guess. I guess I'm talking weird because for me, that is like mysterious land. I was a very shy child, and socially, so to this day, I feel very uncomfortable in social situations, and you know, and so I always manifest a particular. I break that discomfort through my very expressive and talkative, you know, thing. I'll do that. I don't know what I'm trying to say there. That's why I'm just like, eh. We will not. Well, anyways. Yeah, well, I was just explaining why I was saying the weird things I was saying. Is because I do think about, like, how do you talk to people? What do you say? I still don't really know. But I realized that I could amuse people by my talking. So that's what I do. I generally make people in a good mood because I just talk in an amusing way. I always look for amusing things to say because I realized early on if I could make people laugh, they liked me. And that was good enough. If I had them liking that, I knew what they were thinking. They were thinking that's funny or whatever. You know, I mean, I kind of was able to control the situation. And for people who are socially awkward, you probably would understand what I'm talking about. It's like, you know, it's because it is sometimes difficult. For he established a testimony in Jacob, appointed law in Israel, commanded their fathers to make them known to their children, that the generation to come might know them. The children which should be born should rise and declare them to their children. We kind of covered that. I mean, well, I think the meaning of this is clear, and we've been talking about the implications. Like I said, the most important part of this is passing it on to our kids. I mean, that's what this is about. That they might set their hope in God, and not forget the works of God, but keep his commandments. And like I say, it's a combination of modeling that yourself, of keeping them from a lot of bad influences. Meaning, if you send them to school, I have no advice. I don't know what to tell you. Well, you better. I'll tell you what. Because I sent my daughter to high school, and I spent weeks ahead of time preparing her by talking to her about all kinds of things that I'd never bothered to teach my kids about or talk about much because I knew they weren't going to school. And it wasn't hard to prepare, and it wasn't a big deal, and she was able to handle herself just fine. But with a small child, man, it's like, how do you prepare? You know, here's the thing. Like I said, if you're going to send your kindergartner to school, you know, forget Disney, forget all the weird teachers with purple hair and you know, whatever, and strange genders identities to themselves. You know, forget about all that. Other kids know all kinds of stuff about sex, and they're going to start telling it to your kid. Not necessarily. But you're rolling the dice because, like I said, kindergarten, never heard nothing about sex. First grade, the girl sat next to me, knew about 1,000 dirty jokes and told them over and over again. Maybe not 1,000, but she knew at least 10 dirty jokes, and I used to be like, tell me that one again. And she'd tell me, it was a strange thing. Right? I don't know. I remember. Was it? I think kindergarten was somehow different. I think they kept us sequestered better because as soon as I went to, they were making gestures about, you know, they make a hole with one hand, they stick their finger out and go ha ha ha. You know, like, you know what that means? That's what was the playground conversation. You know, they were saying. I remember in the playground, one of the first rhymes I learned was, I love you, you love me. Homosexuality. People think that we are friends, but we're really lesbians. That's the first thing I learned in school. The first song, the first, I don't know if that's actually the first, but literally that was like first grade. Maybe that was kindergarten. I don't remember. I know it was real early. Yeah, all this stuff is, don't don't say gay. What are you talking about? They've been saying it for generations. School is, you're just sending your kid with whatever, parent raised ungodly, unbelieving, unholy crap in their house. And your kid is going to be sitting right next to it. And that other kid's going to, oh, did you see this? Do you know about that? Do you know about, and your kid's going to feel socially awkward because all the other kids, oh, you didn't see, I remember when they were all like, oh, Porky's. And I was a kid, I felt isolated socially just because I couldn't watch R-rated movies. So send your Christian kid to public school. And if you send him to a Christian school, you might have a better time of it, I guess. I want to give those schools an opportunity to acquit themselves better. I don't know. Like I said, when it comes to kids, though, because here's the problem, like, a lot of times discipline problems get sent to private school, and so then you have kids in your private school who are there because they, their parents need them to be. It's a big mess, and I don't envy anyone in that position. I feel bad, but some parents manage to, whatever. The point is, if you're sending them to school, you better be on them. You got to talk to them. You got to maintain that relationship that you had before they went to school. You got to make sure, the whole sit down to dinner every night and talk to how was your day and blah, blah. You better do that. If you leave off that, they will become alienated from you. They will become alone. And your faith is going to be so meaningless to their life because their real troubles have nothing to do with you. I'm just saying that's painting a bleak picture. But that can very well happen if you are not mindful. To at least take care for knowing the situation they're being sent into. You're sending them into the public arena with people whose kids have been raised by the ungodly. With guys who have stacks of porno magazines next to their toilets. That's the houses they come from. I mean, you have to assume that where they have unfettered access to cable TV with all kinds of vile programming. And they're being institutionalized. The institutions of the schools themselves are now attempting to indoctrinate children in sex ideology, which is astonishing. But I guess it's true what they said. They used to say that about that sex education itself was the beginning of this. And I do think the kids, if they're in school, they need an education about sex. And even earlier than that. But that should not be. But it is. It's, and I don't want the school doing it. You have to get out there ahead of the school. But not all parents do. And so you have these kids in this, they try to get them to at least know things. So I don't know. I do talk to all my kids when they hit puberty about puberty and sex. I always I take it right head on. But like I said, you have to give some minimized, smaller version to your kindergartner. I don't know what that would sound like. I'd have to have a 5-year-old right in front of me and start thinking about it. It doesn't make any sense. In fact, that's why I never send my kids to school. Not until a high school daughter. Because at that point, I'm like, okay, I got to trust my upbringing to this point. They're almost an adult. And I don't feel like I was wrong. At least not yet. We'll see, right? We'll see. Okay, well, we're pretty much done for today. Let's see where we're going to pick up tomorrow. Because all this tell it to your children stuff, we're not going to talk about tomorrow. And we'll start at... we'll start with verse 12. Because we're going to read it again anyways, and verse 12 is a good place to start. Let's look at the Egypt stuff. We'll probably go pretty quickly through it. Again, we covered 12 verses today. Well, first 11 verses today, sort of. Because like I said, I did comment on verse 9. and whose spirit was not steadfast with God. So we talked about all this. This is a difficult thing an important thing. It's not that difficult, really, but the world makes it difficult. I mean, I do think that if you have your children with you and you have a good relationship with them and they're not sick of being with you, like sick of you as their teacher, because you can you don't want to wear it out. That's why I don't try to cram things down their throat. I try to be not on them too much. It's like I said, because you can overdo it, and you just cause there'll be repression where people hold things in, and it explodes out later on. And it's just not. That's just not how it works. You do need to do what it says, teach them and all that, but you got and how you do that. It's like people, spare the rod and spoil the child. And people think that means like I got to hit my kid every time he turns around. And they're just whacking him constantly. No, it means when it comes time that is the punishment that's required. Like I always, I've always made lying as a spankable offense. That's definitely one they get it for it. If you lie to me, I don't care what you did. You tell me the truth, there will be no spanking. Especially bigger things. I'm just like, okay, no spanking, but we'll have to figure out. I've never had anything come up where I didn't spank them, where I thought I wished I could punish them anyways, because it was just mostly kids lie about stupid things, and so I made lying about stupid things extremely expensive. I made it extremely expensive, and telling the truth was like a get out of jail free card. You did something wrong, you tell me the truth. And it doesn't mean I wouldn't tell them, okay, now blah, 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 blah. You do that again, you're getting it. And don't lie to me, because I'll look in your eyes and I can tell when you're lying to me. One time I was like, you're not lying to me. You just your last chance to change the story. Oh, and the story got changed. Truth came out. I also made a mistake once, spanking a kid thinking he was lying. Well, he wouldn't tell me anything. But actually, he just didn't know. But, we've talked about that. You know what all the kids say? All the kids say, yeah, but you know what? You spanked him for the right reason. Because you thought, that I did it in good conscience. That I didn't do it capriciously. It was just, I felt everyone just seemed to, no one had answers for me. So we all make mistakes, too. You got to be careful not to make them too big. And at least make them in good conscience. You know what I mean? But in order to be given that leeway to make mistakes in good conscience, you have to build up trust first, that you're not constantly having to be allowed that to do things in good conscience. Like being taxing constantly their faith that you're doing stuff in good conscience, because you're constantly on them. It's like if your kid needs that much punishment, your discipline is already out the window, garbage. Because maybe they're like 7, 8, and now they're just a nightmare. I've always said discipline begins with babies. Brush their gums, brush their teeth. They hate it, but they will learn that you are irresistible. That's why I start young. To me, that's discipline. It's like, no, you must have your teeth brushed. No matter how much you don't like it, no matter how much you scream and cry, I'm going to gently hold you here and brush your teeth. And eventually they will be angry if you don't do it. If you don't brush your teeth. Anyways, thanks for joining me this day. We'll pick it up at verse 12 tomorrow. And continue. Now the things. What are the things that happened that need to be remembered? Okay? Till then, thanks for joining me, etc., etc. There's nothing to add.